Good afternoon, Mr. President. Good afternoon, colleagues. Thank you very much for affording me the opportunity to speak on this bill. I will be brief. This time I will be brief. Mr. President, I've spoken extensively on the subject of cannabis in this chamber already, and I do not wish to regurgitate much of that information. I still hold firmly to my belief that in the previous bills discussed, we should have put a percentage limit of THC on the cannabis that we allow to be used in Barbados for any purpose, and it may have solved some of the problems that will emerge out of some of the others. The bill before us, however, is just to put a small fee on persons found with small quantities of cannabis. And I have no problem supporting this in the sense that for too long, too many of our young men have been incarcerated for an addiction. What is an addiction rather than a crime? And I really think that we should look at cannabis use and cannabis addiction more seriously. And I'm happy that we are reinforcing the notion of rehabilitation versus incarceration in this bill, especially for young persons under the age of 18. Mr. President, I know that there may be an attitude in our society of throwing our hands in the air where cannabis is concerned, both its prevalence in the society and its use amongst persons. But I wish to point out that when we quote some of the statistics from other countries who have already legalized cannabis for recreational purposes, I'm using that term here, though it's not in the bill, who've already legalized cannabis for recreational purposes, there are some interesting statistics that emerge. For example, in California, sir, where most cannabis is planted in what is known as the Emerald Triangle, which is about 62 times the size of Barbados. California has a serious problem in terms of the distribution of cannabis, though it's legalized for recreational purposes. And there's a reason for that. When the vote came for it to be legalized, it was passed unanimously. But there was also a clause asking whether you would like an outlet in your neighborhood. And people voted against that. And so there are very few outlets in California for the transmission of cannabis. Similar thing within the continental US, where because marijuana is not legal at the federal level, you cannot trade across borders. So it is believed that California in and of itself has about 10 years supply of marijuana just sitting down because it cannot go anywhere. I've just pointed that out to say that this particular legislation just jogged my memory about something, a little problem I had with the sacramental bill when it came up. And it just highlights it even more. Under subsection 6.4 of the sacramental bill, which speaks about cannabis for use at events away from the worship site. For those who may recall that bill, you can plant the cannabis that you will use at the worship site on the site, and you're only given permission to plant enough to satisfy the needs of those who worship there. And I found that problematic in that if we were to take Rastafarianism as a religion within the context of other religions that operate within our jurisdiction, we left no space for retreats. A man can open a retreat house and decide that you can come and spend a week for therapy and reflection. But what was troubling in the sacramental bill, sir, is if you have an event, and again, because, as I mentioned at that time, because Rastafarianism is not, well, based on what the information that was given to us, was not clearly defined in terms of its religious forms, we could not say what an event is. So if a man decides that I will hold something like Reggae on the Hill as a worship session, the bill puts him in trouble, and it puts us in trouble, and it puts this particular piece of legislation in trouble. Reason being, sir, when someone is granted an exempt permit to have an open-air event, the person applying for the permit can carry enough cannabis to supply the sacramental needs of those who are there. If his worship site cannot grow more than the persons who normally worship there, but his open-air event is bigger than that, where is the extra going to come from? In the sacramental bill, it said where the extra is coming from. It's phantom herb. And I use that term because persons traveling to the event can carry 14 grams of marijuana with them. Where are they getting it from? Where is it coming from? You're not supposed to take it away from the worship premises. Marijuana that is passed in the medicinal marijuana bill should not be available for that purpose. So where is this 14 grams that every person going to an open-air event coming from? So this particular bill permits the police to stop people who can legally carry marijuana. And it doesn't say where it is coming from. And one of the questions I'd like to ask regarding this particular bill, sir, is, does this mean that the law will not actively pursue those who are responsible for putting this drug into the hands of our children? See, for me, it's about the young people. I recognize that adults are to be responsible people and can make decisions for themselves. But as I mentioned before, as a person who spent some time in the teaching service in this country, I have seen personally what cannabis does to little children. I've seen what it does to the minds of young men. I've seen them come to class and cannot function. I've seen how it has ruined lives. I know parents cry every night trying to keep their son or daughter away from this thing. And that's still a problem for me. But in as much as this bill reinforces our desire to put these people into rehab and try to get their lives fixed, I will support that. I'll support anything that prevents so many of our young men from being incarcerated for an addiction. And so I have no problem supporting that and the minimal fine that is applied here. I just believe that there are some things we need to revisit, and I believe that we need to revisit some of those cannabis bills we would have passed before to tighten up some of the legislation within them especially the Sacramental bill. I think it is very loose, to the point where I believe that even the Rastafarians now are a little concerned about it. And I think we should really tighten up some of those things, just for a matter of dotting our I's and crossing our T's. But as I said, sir, I do support the minimal penalty of the small fine, so that, and I would reinforce, however, that I believe that that rehabilitation should be mandatory, some form of rehabilitation for persons who are found with cannabis, because we know, it is not a secret, that it induces psychosis, and we just need to make sure that people are in the right place. There are some persons, as Senator Franklin said, will smoke marijuana all their life and it will do nothing to them. But we also have to look at that one little boy or one little girl who uses it once, and it affects them. And let us get treatment for them as soon as possible. Even the man, I know a young man who is convinced that the marijuana does him good. It is when he goes down to the mental and they inject him, that's the problem. And he argues with me, when I smoke, sir, I good, It's the things they give me down there. And I can't argue with him because I don't know what they give him down there and I don't know how it makes him feel. But I do believe that we should do all that is possible to try to rehabilitate all of our people and try to get help, because it is an addiction rather than a crime in and of itself. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Senator Reverend Dr. Rogers. Senator Dr. Springer.
Thank you, Mr. President. I will endeavor to give an abridged version of my presentation, given that a lot that I had intended to say has already been said. I want to start first by just giving the historical context of marijuana use, or the use of cannabis within the region. As a historian, I almost feel compelled to examine the history of use just to get a sense of the modern perception and, in some cases, the modern application of some plant species, and in this particular case of cannabis sativa. Now, the use of the plant that we refer to as weed or herb, marijuana, dates back to 3000 BC. This is on the continent of Europe as well as in Asia. Now, as I said this before, do not particularly like using the word marijuana, especially since I discover its xenophobic and racist origins. And I would have made the point when I spoke previously in this house that it was associated with the Mexican migrants coming into America, and also with black people in the 20s and the 30s. And treatment and the connotation of that particular word always carries some kind of racial prejudice undertones. Now, Mr. President, within the Caribbean context, we normally associate the use of cannabis, the use of marijuana with the Rastafarian movement. But in actual fact, as was said earlier in here today, marijuana, cannabis was introduced into the region by Indian indentured servants who came after the emancipation period. And as a matter of fact, prior to the 1930s, marijuana use was commonplace, especially in those territories where there were large Indian populations, Trinidad, Guyana, and to the surprise of many, Jamaica. There were a lot of Indians, still are, a lot of Indians, a lot of Chinese in Jamaica. You could go into a shop back in the 1930s and buy marijuana, and not just marijuana to smoke, but some of the byproducts that even the ones we use today, you could easily go into any shop in any village and buy these things. And yes, people smoked marijuana back in the 30s, but then let's just take our minds back into the 1930s just to get a sense of the type of living conditions that black people in the Caribbean and in Barbados were forced to endure. We were near the end of what historians refer to as the lost century. We just recently came out of a lost decade, but we would have endured a lost century between that period, 1847 to the 1930s, when nothing of anything positive, but we have amelioration, anything good was happening for black people. There was no social upward mobility, nothing. In fact, when you check the history books, there's hardly anything much written about that period after emancipation leading up to the 1930s. Black people were suffering. Perhaps the only escape some of them had from the harsh realities of their time might have been the use of the same marijuana. But that is really just an aside. But let me just bring it back home to Barbados, because I'm sure that despite the fact that marijuana was introduced into Barbados, really widespread use of marijuana was introduced in the 70s with the introduction of the Rastafarian religion. I'm sure that in the 1930s there was movement right across the region, and there would have been marijuana would have been used in Barbados in the 1920s and 30s as well. Maybe not as extensively as much as in Guyana or in Trinidad, but it was used. But let's fast forward to the 1970s, where we saw widespread use of marijuana. I think it was like 1975 or so that the Rastafarian religion took root in Barbados. And we all know that that religion came out of Jamaica in the 1920s, and it was, for the most part, associated with antisocial elements, rebels. It attracted society's most undesirable persons, most undesirable elements. So naturally, a religion and all the attendant behaviors such as that was not going to gel well with the conservative Barbadian populace at the time. So apart from the restrictions that would have been put in place in 1937 to ban the use of marijuana, we also would have had restrictions or rejection of this drug and its association with rebel behavior, antisocial behavior. We also had a full rejection from a vast majority of the Barbadian population. But the reality is many people use marijuana. Many people, all walks of life, smoke marijuana today. Even in Barbados, with our conservative nature, many Barbadians, and I'm telling you, use marijuana. And the truth is, and I said this before, marijuana is no more addictive than alcohol. It's no more addictive than tobacco. And these two drugs I just mentioned are very socially and legally accepted drugs. But we can think about it. Tobacco causes cancer, and other respiratory, it causes lung cancer, and other respiratory ailments. Rum, alcohol, it damages the liver, and it also results in a lot of persons engaging in violence. People get drunk and hurt themselves, hurt their families. You get a lot of this, and these things are not necessarily associated with the use of marijuana. I'm just trying to build a context just to, work on the perception that exists out there towards marijuana, because that's going to be a hill battle, getting around the perception that is held about marijuana. The reality is that, as I said, many young people already use marijuana in this country. Many young people. When I was a student at university, I had the opportunity to travel to Mona campus with the intercampus games. I believe it was in 2007. And whilst in Jamaica, I experienced something that blew my mind. Blew my mind. Yeah? I saw for the first time, Mr. President, people like me, like you, persons in suits, persons who work at the university in the position of lecturer and administrator, sitting down in a hall smoking marijuana. I was blown away. Because prior to that, I would have associated marijuana use with fellas on the block, with rastas, with people in the community. Yes, Bill Clinton. At that time, I didn't know that. I never associated marijuana use with people in society. It was a shock to me. Because I had some of the same perceptions that exist in Barbados today about who use marijuana. But the reality is that normal, bright, young people at university level and all levels use marijuana. Normal people, just like me and you, use marijuana. I've seen it all through my university life, and I was at university for a good while. Yeah? And in as much as there's a fear that it leads people into the use of harder drugs, I've not seen the evidence of it in this country. I've not seen the evidence to suggest that a person is more likely to transition into harder drugs like cocaine and dope and such like from experimenting with marijuana, and a person is likely to become a drunkard from drinking a shot of whiskey or a shot of rum or Guinness or Heineken, whatever drink these young people are drinking every weekend and every day in this country. I've not seen the evidence to suggest that. In fact, I see a lot more people, or just as many people, most persons who smoke marijuana in this country drink a lot of alcohol as well. A lot of them. Young people drink a lot of alcohol. If it's not Hennessy, it is Guinness. A lot of it. So I don't see any evidence to suggest that there's a epidemic, any evidence to suggest that there's a large amount of persons who are becoming zombies or who are ending up in psychiatric hospital because of marijuana use. Normal people smoke marijuana, they do it discreetly, and they move on with their lives, and they live productive lives. I've seen that, Mr. President. And that's the reality on the ground. Now, this particular bill that we are debating here today is an attempt to decriminalize the use of marijuana in the event that a person is caught with 14 grams or less. Now, I'm a person who deals with people in the community. I see people every day, young people, they come to me for testimonials, they come to me for recommendations, they come to me for advice. Now I've seen occasions where people, as was even mentioned here today, went to apply for jobs. I had a young man came to me last year, he wanted to work in the Canadian Farm Labor Program. But he had, as he put it, a little charge. A little charge. Apparently he was, the police raided the area there and they held him and he had a spliff or something on him and they took him in and he was charged with possession. And he got the police certificate of character. He took it in. I spoke to the lady. The lady tried to explain to him as gently as she could. She would see what she can do and so on and so forth. But she told me afterwards that there was no way he was getting that job. No way. Because when those people see this, they see that he has a drug charge. Whether it was a spliff or he was a trafficker, it didn't make any difference. He had a drug offense on his police certificate of character, a blemish on his character that meant that almost disqualified him from being part of that program, from going overseas and picking tobacco. He could not do because he was held with a spliff, I think maybe 3 or 4 years previous. So this piece of legislation aims, amongst other things, to prevent things like that from happening. Because, and there are a number of different reasons why, I can list, but they were said here earlier, why it is necessary to perhaps move away from this idea of criminalizing our young people. And it speaks to a broader attempt by government to end the criminalizing of a lot of things that aren't worth going to court for. But this one in particular is interesting because people perhaps is of some belief that if marijuana is decriminalized in this country, our system is put in place where rather than take a man and drag him before the courts, to charge him and drag him before the courts, you're going to give him a ticket so he can go and pay and continue his life as before. It's going to create more drug users in this country. I just don't see how. How is it going to create more drug users? But they were smoking before. Many people smoking. Many young and old people smoking. And the fact that they're not going to get, because they see the police there, it's still illegal. I'm sure they're going to run if they see police, unless they have $200 handy to give away. And most of them probably don't. So it's still illegal. Right? So you're not going to go and say, no, I'm going to start smoking from tomorrow because now if the police hold me outside smoking on the block, I just have to pay $200 I don't have. No. That is a nonsense. And to contradict that belief in people's head is a nonsense as well. So I don't, so I just have to respond to that belief that we're going to see an uptick in in drug use. And believe me, from as early as 2015, Jamaica decriminalized the use of marijuana, followed by Belize and Antigua, St. Kitts. All these countries in CARICOM decriminalized the use of marijuana. And you've not heard of any epidemic or any uptick in any of those places in marijuana use, because it has not happened. Now, I share the concerns for our children. I do. We may have very well put a greater effort into educating them into the use and the abuse of drugs. We may very well have to, because there's a perception out there that, this is almost tantamount to legalizing. And we don't want that perception to take root. So we may have to work on getting on our messaging to reinforce in people's mind that it is still illegal. Just not going to use those draconian methods that we would have used in the past, but it's still illegal. But I'm always conscious of the fact that children are very impressionable, and they may not fully understand the law. And may more lean towards the understanding that someone outside on the street may have, that may not necessarily be the true understanding or the true definition of the bill. That's why I'm happy that if in, I think, section 6B, I'm happy that in the bill there's a provision for persons of a certain age, under 18, that they will have access to rehabilitation if caught with marijuana. If you're under 18, you're caught with a spliff, you have to undergo some counseling. I support that. It's not option. It's mandatory, it seems. You have to have exposure to that kind of counseling. And they may very well need that, because the reality is that a lot of young people only smoke marijuana just to fit in the block, to fit in with their peers. Because your peers are the ones who introduce you to marijuana in the first place. And I'm telling you, we need to do, we don't need to, but if you ever study the block culture in this country, understand the dynamics of a block on this country, is what I refer to as the great equalizer in this country. Whether you went to Carmere, or you went to St. Michael's or Alexandria or wherever, when you go on the block, you are just as equal. If you have gone to Elmer Parish or St. Lucie or CP or areas, it doesn't matter. You're all one. You become equal. You fit right in. If you're not getting along at home with your family, and you are estranged from your family, your people in your house don't like you, you go on the block, you find a home. You feel welcome. And if people there are smoking weed, and you're a young person and you want to fit in, then you're going to smoke some weed. And that's the reality. All the information, everything you need to know about life, you're going to get it from there. So when we have now a young person, 16, 17 years old, and there's a lot of 16 and 17-year-olds and 15-year-olds and 14-year-olds and 13-year-olds already smoking weed in this country. So if we can capture them in this piece of legislation and make it mandatory that they go and seek counseling, then that's a good thing. I support that. All right? I support that. Because we know that I appreciate that it may have a more deleterious effect on a young mind like that. And not only the fact that they're using the drug and it's strong, because in many cases these young people already got other issues that they're wrestling with in life. And this will only compound the matter. All right? But as I said, this type of legislation was in place from 6 years ago in CARICOM, and we have not seen anything to suggest that we're going to have any real problem with our young people. But while I'm on the topic of young people, I just want to raise the point that we have another issue, another crisis that I want persons to be equally concerned about when it comes to our young people. And that is this use of sweetened drinks and no face to face. We dealt with that. We have an issue with non-communicable diseases and childhood obesity in this country. That is a real concern as well. I would like to see some equal amount of energy placed on as it relates to our children. The type of foods that we are giving our children to consume, to eat every day, the type of drink that we are thinking, the families are now too lazy to cook, so healthy food, so they're going to buy fast food and give their children a sweet drink. And then we got children 10 years old, nearly 200 pounds. That's a real problem. That is a crisis waiting to happen. That is a slow motion crisis. It might even be fast motion now. You know? But we having this. That is a situation that we have to treat to in this country. That I want some attention being placed on how we treat to what our children eat. Not only yes, be concerned about what they smoke, but also be very concerned about what they consume, what they eat. Yes, that is something that I would want some attention shown to, Mr. President. So as I close, I promise that I will not be very long today. I just want to make the point that this legislation to put measures in place to ensure that our young people can still, even if they make, as you say, a mistake, you know, if they go through a phase. We all go through phases in our life. When we are a little bit rebellious and we do things that we know that we're not necessarily supposed to do because we're young. And some of us are foolish. You understand? That if the mistake that we make is that we were caught smoking marijuana or caught with marijuana in our possession, if that's the mistake that we make, that mistake does not follow us for the rest of our adult life. That is why I support this piece of legislation. And with those very few words, Mr. President, I am obliged to you.
Thank you very much, Senator Dr. Springer. Senator Boyce.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I must confess to a certain amount of conflict on this topic. Now, despite what you may hear, Mr. President, the SJM, remember that's the silent judgmental majority, sir, which I have declared myself to speak for, is not involved in elective politics, and I guarantee you that if ever that were the case, persons would know. But what we're talking about here, sir, is a mindset, is a society, and it's a recognition of who we are as Barbadians. And this recognition means, sir, that if we're honest with ourselves and have that conversation, we know that from the time you start to talk about weed, drugs, anything of this nature, herb, it will be viewed very harshly. Some of my colleagues, sir, may prefer that we don't touch the subject. But the reality of being in this place, I view, Mr. President, is one where, duality aside, if it is something which requires discourse, despite how we may feel about it personally, despite how we may even view it professionally, our duty to the public in this circumstance warrants the discussion, sir. The fact is, the 2018 poll from CARICOM marijuana report stipulated a 63% favorable viewpoint of marijuana reform legislation. Sir, there are some who will say, get them what they want, in the colloquial sense, sir. Sir, in the 2016 Wickham poll, favored by the majority leader in this House, sir, the view was that 43% of Barbadians admitted to usage of the illegal substance. So, logically, the evidence says that the current deterrent policy is resulting in a 43% usage, and the Caribbean viewpoint is that 63% says, let's have another look at it, sir. And often we find in these circumstances that the views of the majority, and this is the difficulty now, sir, must be considered in determining policy while still being cognizant of the views and the rights of the minority. And what legal rationalization allows is, well, I can do one once I don't infringe on the rights of the minority. Some will say that the fact that we have allowed and legalized the usage for a certain religious sect imputes discrimination against those who may seek to use it for their own religious purposes, albeit not defined. But that challenge hasn't been raised as yet, Mr. President. Simply, what we can agree is that the evidence shows clearly from the sociological perspective that the deterrence model has not yielded much success with regard to uptake. The second point, sir, we need to recognize is that deterrence comes at a cost. This is a cost which is reflected. We just dealt with the estimates, Mr. President, and this is a cost that is reflected not just in financial costs, but also in terms of time, resources, and community efforts being spent to enforce it. So the question is, sir, whether the proposed decriminalization, because we have accepted and we've heard time and time again, it's not legalization, which is supposed to go to referendum. The question is whether or not the proposed decriminalization will free up any resources for anything else. We recognize, sir, that the police force is already stretched in dealing with the issues at hand. In fact, sir, this will actually impact some of the lawyers who deal with these matters on a day-to-day basis. But I am yet to see anyone cry for lawyers, Mr. President, as sad as that may be. As set out just now by Dr. Senator Springer, sir, the current effect of a criminal charge for this drug abuse will affect your employment. It will even affect your travel opportunities. And let's speak frankly, Mr. President, there is a certain socio-economic group who is impacted by this more than others. So it's all right to, on one hand, to say, well, this will lead us further down the path, and I recognize that viewpoint. Sir, as a bit of a sidestep, there's a part of me that loves the fact that Trinidadian author B.C. Pires wrote about the fact that you would get a ticket in the Barbadian airport if you stood up too long waiting for somebody when they came out and you blocked up the roadway, and that was the difference between Barbados and other countries. But when we recognize where that stems from, where that culture stems from, and the benefit of such strict enforcement stems from, we may want to revisit it, albeit still seeking to preserve the benefits. This is the issue, because too far left is right. But let me come back, sir. That's poetic waxing, sir. The point is, sir, if you are convicted currently, your future employment would be impacted, your future travel will be impacted, and your future place in society, if you are from a certain socioeconomic background, will be greatly impacted. My sociologist friends indicate that this has a long-term effect. Once you start on the path of a criminal conviction, it is hard to pull yourself back. So, sir, does this set you on a path? The question of decriminalization and the utilization of civil penalties still carries a certain stigma. It still carries a stigma. It might not be as much, but there is still the stigma, and there is still the societal values. There is still the societal value which say you should not do that. And we must recognize on who that duty lies to continue to enforce that value as Barbadians in terms of what we send and the message we send to the next generation, Mr. President. Senator Rogers has indicated that we cannot legislate morality, and we cannot certainly legislate the Barbadian way of life. It is up to us, one and all, to seek to educate, inform, and continue those traditions which make us who we are, Mr. President. Where will decriminalization lead us? Sir, only time will tell. The fears expressed may be warranted, but the data seems to indicate that they are not. For my part, sir, again, if you're doing this, recognize the availability bias, and you have to spend money on your education campaign. There are persons who will believe that they can now smoke willy-nilly once they have their $200 in the pocket. That's the message that will go out on social media. There are those who will take advantage of this to utilize it for whatever purposes, to see, look here, look what you have done. Your messaging has to be on point, and that messaging is important with regard to the most essential aspect, which is the protection of the younger ones. Sir, I was part of a program in which we were interviewing police officers from Seattle when they were dealing with the issue of legalization, sir. And what struck me was a senior detective saying that from his layman perspective, you're essentially putting something harmful out there. But having had time to meditate and consider the position, the drugs were always there. Your legislation doesn't create the supply, and it doesn't mandate the demand. The drugs will be there. What results in an uptake or decrease are your social policies, your educational policies, which are utilized to reduce the desire. And this is where we need to say, if you are taking this step, that the government has to commit itself to ensuring that there is not the resultant detrimental result, sir. So what efforts are we speaking about? Firstly, resources which are being moved from pursuing these petty convictions need to be channeled into going after the proverbial big fish. Some will say that we know who they are. Some will say that we don't. Well, hopefully with the money saved, let's at least pursue the protection and the enforcement of proper Class 1 drug interdiction, sir. Secondly, sir, the funding for the NCSA, National Council for Substance Abuse. they had me looking at the estimates, Mr. President. You know, I declared my skill set. And sir, when I look at the estimates, the National Council for Substance Abuse has not been allocated an increasing funded for their increased role. But they're being told that they have to deal with young offenders. So if you're going to roll it out, do it properly. Give them the resources to deal with these young offenders, so when they come, it's not going to be just a waste of time. This would then help us when we go to speak to our family members, to our neighbors, to our imaginary party, sir, to say in good conscience, this step has been done, but these steps are being taken to ensure that there is less potential detrimental effects, sir. Most importantly, sir, we need to fund, and this is what the evidence says, we need to fund increased research-based prevention programs. You cannot make a move like this without making sure that you're funding evidence-based intervention. Evidence-based intervention is scientifically proven to reduce the desire and the uptake of the utilization of drugs. So if you're doing this, commit to the Barbadian people that you will fund this aspect of it. Use the money that is being saved from less resources to pursue the petty matters to fund this aspect, and therefore let us sleep a little easier when we have to make these type of choices. Sir, at the end of the day, the data shows that the current methods are not working. So we can say, let's try something different. If we try something different, I urge that if we see something trending in the wrong direction, that we are not too vainglorious enough to change our minds. I thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you very much, Senator Boyce. Deputy President, Senator Greenwich.
Thank you, Mr. President. I want to say a few words, sir, on this amendment to the Drug Abuse Prevention and Control Act, CAP 131. Let me repeat, sir. I want to say a few words on this amendment. I emphasize the word amendment because I want to stress that this is not a new piece of legislation which is being brought to the House. This is just an amendment. And the amendment, sir, recognizes the fact that persons, very young persons too, have gone to jail for very, very small amounts of marijuana. They've taken that into consideration. And so the amendment, sir, spells out that it is still, to this minute, and even when this is passed, it will still be a crime, even if you are in possession of a small amount. However, what the actual amendment is saying is that if you are in possession of 14 grams or less, you will not be imprisoned for that. Instead, you will pay a fixed penalty of $200. But more importantly, and I think this is where all of us would have to emphasize, more importantly, the bill speaks to a rehabilitation program in addition to that $200 fine. And so you don't want to give the impression that all it is that instead of imprisonment now, you're going to be fined $200 full stop. Because when I read the legislation, I was impressed, and that's the thing I was saying, that if they don't have something like this in the legislation, I wouldn't agree with it. But I am in full support of it for that particular addition where the $200 fine, yes, is there, plus the rehabilitation. So like Senator Rogers, it won me over. That won me over. So I do believe that that amendment will help, and that is why I am so much for it. The amendment is at section 6A in particular, and it says that if you are under 18 years of age and you are caught in possession of this small amount, then automatically, in addition to paying the $200 fine, you should attend the NCSA, the National Council for Substance Abuse, and you get your assessment and you get your treatment. That position 2, there's similar provision for someone who's over 18 to also get assessment and treatment. Now, sir, the critics of this bill, and I do not mean critics on the inside of the Senate, I don't mean that at all. I mean those on the outside, as you hear them discussed about a few weeks ago when it was brought in the other place. And you listen to them, and they're asking the similar question that I heard not long ago. Why is it that you are bigging up marijuana on the one hand for being such a good economic prospect, and still you're punishing people for having a small amount? And that is the question being posed. And they ask the question, why not go the whole hog? And even when we had the committee meeting at Sherburne Center, I was part of that committee, there was a similar sentiment coming up. Why not go the whole hog? We're here because we want the whole hog. Well, why not legalize it? And my answer to that is quite simple. Maybe that day will come. And maybe it will come sooner than we think. I can't say when it will come. But we've heard that there will be a referendum on legalizing marijuana. But, sir, this amendment at this stage is not concerned with legalizing marijuana. This amendment today, at this point, it has a completely different focus. We may get there, we may get there with baby strides, step by step by step. At this point, what we are concerned about is not the legalizing of marijuana. So, I recall Senator Franklin earlier, who was giving reasons why it shouldn't be, and he was using instances where people told him this and people told him that, where we can't prove. And we don't know whether it's the gospel, not from you, sir, maybe you did hear it, but what you heard, whether that was the gospel. And that is the thing. And therefore, we don't want to pass it off here as though, yes, somebody told somebody, this body had to pull on my spliff or whatever it was. And
It wasn't you, Captain.
no, it would never be me. It would never be me.
Was it bad for you?
It would never be me. You see, I do not see, sir, how you can say that this amendment is the result of a government promise. I can't see, because I'll be honest with you, I don't see how this amendment could be a trade-off with those who want us to go the full distance. Because let me tell you the truth. If someone had promised me to go the full distance, and this is what they were offering me, they would never see my face or my support again. Because, to be quite honest, this I would consider to be an insult to me if I wanted to go the full distance. And I know nobody would be so stupid as to promise somebody to go, and then this is what you give them. Sir, the other thing is, I made the point earlier that this is a mere amendment to Cap 131. It's just an amendment. This is an amendment to legislation which is already on our statute books. It's merely a section which has now been included to substitute a fixed fine for being in possession of a small amount rather than going to prison. So all of the problems which, again, someone like Senator Franklin would have been making earlier about the police not knowing whether it's cannabis or not, and about the weight of it, those things are there already. This is nothing that this is introducing. Even without this legislation, the police still had to find out whether it was cannabis. And the person who had it still had to, sometimes it made it very easy for the police. But the point is, this does not introduce the problem. And therefore, we should not come into the Senate and make it look as though, look what problems we are bringing with this piece of legislation. This legislation is there already. We are just slipping in a little amendment to the act. Simply put, Mr. President, we are saying that, and we know it, all of us in here, we know that as a result of, my grandmother used to say old-fangled. She had that rule. Old-fangled, antiquated, and kind of outmoded thinking. As a result of that, we know that some 17-year-old and 18-year-old young men have been incarcerated for spliff. We know that. And we know, as Senator Boyce and others have said, that their future would have been ruined by it. We know that, sir. For some of them, I agree that it is like being buried alive. When they're at the height, of their adolescence, that you're going to take them for this one infraction and you're going to throw them in jail. And some of them have never recovered from that first incarceration. They've never recovered from it. That one instance, that one mistake they made, and they're like buried alive for it. We've always heard, sir, that the punishment should fit the crime. Heard that on numerous occasions. So, what we're saying, and we're asking that in today's Barbados, is it appropriate that a 17 or 18-year-old youngster should serve a year in jail for having something like a thimble full of marijuana? This is what we're asking. And this is what this particular piece of legislation is asking, and this is what it is trying to cure. Someone of that age, this time of our development, do you think it is right for that person to serve time in jail for it? You see, sir, we have to realize that some of those sent to prison because of that old-fashioned thinking, they had simply fallen into bad company. We have to realize, sir, that some of them had fallen victim to peer pressure. We have to realize, sir, that some of them had merely made bad choices. So the question we have to ask now, and this is what we're asking, can we reach the same destination, the same balance, by taking a different bus? And I don't mean the prison bus. Can we reach the same destination by taking a different bus? Can we send a message to Barbadians, especially young Barbadians, that at this stage of our development, the use of marijuana for recreational purposes is still against the law? Can we send them that message? The answer is yes. We can send them that message. And this is where the legislation, the amendment, is being innovative. We are saying here, you are doing wrong, yes, you're doing wrong. Still in the eyes of the law, you are doing wrong, yes. But we are not going to use the proverbial hammer to kill a fly. We are not going to use the proverbial hammer to kill a fly. This is what we are, this is the balance. In other words, sir, we are saying, why is it, or why does it have to be a custodial sentence, as had so often happened? Why is it that it has to be a custodial sentence? Why shouldn't it be automatic, something like community service? Because community service, I believe, sir, teaches them responsibility. It teaches them discipline. Because we tell them point blank, the community service has to be done by a certain time. 7 days, whatever, a certain time. And they have to report to that community officer who is supervising them. And I believe that that kind of punishment would have been far more desirable for their character building. Not, sometimes you go, bam, jail, bam, jail. We could take a different route before. We could have done it. You don't have to use that hammer to kill a fly. And sir, when at Dodds, when that person goes up to jail, that person becomes a burden to government, because government is responsible for that person's health, the person's safety, the person's welfare. You have to feed the person, and so on. So there's an economic cost, Mr. President, to every single person who goes into that prison. Whether the person is already convicted or whether the person is merely on remand, there is a cost. And there's an economic cost to those who are imprisoned, Mr. President, whether you're in prison for the big three, whether it be murder and rape or burglary, whether you're in prison for that, or whether you are in prison for smoking a spliff, the economic cost is there. The economic cost is there regardless of what your offense is. The other thing, sir, is that we live in a very judgmental society. Very, very judgmental society. Barbadians, all of us know, in fact, I believe it's much wider than this country alone. We regard going to prison, sir, worse than if you had a fine for the same offense. Very judgmental. People who end up in prison, sir, are regarded in a totally different light than those who are fined. the single mistake of having, and we heard Senator Boyce mention it, we heard Senator Springer mention it, the single mistake of having a little thimble full of marijuana can have lifelong consequences. Can go on your record. You're lucky if you'll ever find a job. What people didn't say, I make bold to say it too, is that no father or mother wants you, young man at 17, to have a relationship with your daughter if you've gone through those doors at Glenderry or at Dodds. Because you are considered to be a jailbird. A jailbird. In the eyes of Barbadians, even if, Mr. President, you spend 14 days on remand, you've gone to jail. Sir, even if when your matter is tried and you are acquitted, you went to jail. And the stigma still remains, Mr. President. It still remains. I know a fellow who didn't live very far from me. I live near East Point, Marley Vale. A fellow who didn't live very far from me used to work at the bank. Used to drive a nice car. Father liked him. The father liked him for the daughter. Oh, yes. And he got into some trouble. And he spent about a week on remand. Then the matter was settled. No case came up. Nothing of the sort. You know, the father just asked the girl one day, what do you think the people in this district would say about you? He didn't tell she another word. But that was the end of the relationship between herself and that fella. The fella went to Canada where his one parent was, and he's there till today. Settled down now, has a wife and children and so on. But I only say that to show you that once you walk through those doors, once you walk through there, that stigma, it attaches to you. Even though no case came up of what the offense was supposed to be, the father said, what you think the people in this district will think about you. You know? So, Mr. President, prisons such as Dodds are also learning centers for crime. There are universities, sir, for criminal activity. These young men go up there and they meet hardened criminals. And they listen to what we can only term their lectures. And they come out, sir, worse than they went in. Because those youngsters at 17 and 18 are very impressionable. They're easily persuaded, and they fall victim to that jail environment. I will reflect, sir, on something which was said by Angela Davis. She's a U.S., United States black activist. She said, jails and prisons are designed to break human beings, to convert the population into specimens in a zoo, obedient to our keepers, but dangerous to each other. That is what very often when you send those young people to jail, you do. designed to break human beings, convert the population into specimens in a zoo, obedient to our keepers, but dangerous to each other. And as I said, sir, for me, Mr. President, the most important point in the legislation is that requirement for rehab. I think, sir, that that section speaks eloquently to the aim and the objective of the amendment. We have to realize, sir, that rehab goes hand in hand with the fine. Rehab goes hand in hand with the fine. The fine by itself, Mr. President, may make very little impression. Because as Senator Boyce has said, once you got the $200 in your pocket, you can. Without that, it means very little. The legislation only makes sense, sir, if we can pull back that young man, that young guy who is on the street, if we can pull him back from destruction. And we are attempting to do it in this amendment. Like Senator Boyce too, I believe that the rehab program can make a difference. And Senator Rogers said it as well. The National Council for Substance Abuse and the Drug Court, they must work hand in hand in this rehab exercise. There must be dedicated personnel involved in the program. Remember, I am not speaking about volunteering. I am joining Senator Boyce in calling for the funding of the National Council on Substance Abuse to carry out this program as well as they can and as well as they deserve. I am saying, sir, that a high value must be attached to the program, and money and energy must be put into this program. It is a program which is designed to save our young people, and let us make it look as though that is what it is actually designed to do. The success, Mr. President, of the program should not only be based on how few persons are now being sent to DODS. It shouldn't be based on that, sir, but it should be based on how many of our young people this program will rescue. Mr. President, with those words, I'm obliged to you.
Thank you very much, Deputy President Senator Greenwich. Senator Sands.
Thank you, Mr. President. I assume I'm probably the last speaker to make a contribution on this bill, and I guess that is a blessing. Okay, well, based on the speeches that were made before my presentation, Mr. President, what I've heard in this honorable chamber, good information, for the most part. Senator Springer, Senator Greenwich, Senator Boyce, and the other senators that spoke, Senator Rogers, all provided valuable information so as to provide clarity to the public as it relates to what is the intention of this bill. Senator Greenwich has made it clear this bill does not change the legality of marijuana. Marijuana is illegal today, and even after this bill is passed, it will be illegal tomorrow. That needs to be made clear to the public, because I am a young person, and my journeys in this country, I've listened to the conversations that are being had in respect to this bill. And there's a preconceived notion that this bill is seeking to do the exact opposite, which is to free up the weed, as the young people would say. That is not the case. This is a responsible government. We understand that there are issues as it relates to marijuana, as it relates to the psychiatric effects that it can have. We're also aware of the economic effects that it has. But at the end of the day, a judgment call must be made. And why is that judgment? Why do we have to make that judgment call? Let's give it the context. As it currently stands in Barbados, there are a number of young persons constantly before the law courts. University students, secondary school students, professionals, skilled persons, a whole list of productive people in this country that work day in and day out. Their only vice? Use of marijuana. They are not traffickers, they're not cultivators. They just like to smoke marijuana. This is a fact. I am well aware that everyone in this country knows somebody that went before the court for the use of marijuana, and they will buttress the statement by saying, but he didn't a bad fella. But the law, as it currently stands, suggests that if he is found in possession with 14 grams or less, he is liable to be charged for possession of marijuana. Now, as the law currently is, if you go before the law courts, once you're charged, once you're arrested and charged, and you go before the law courts, on the first occasion, you may be given some leniency from the court. But if this is your vice, and the first time you get out scotch-free, in other words, you do community service, or in some instances, just get reprimanded and discharged. You get a blight, as the young people will call it. But because it's your voice, you might come back again before the law courts. And again before the law courts. The leader of government business indicated that there was approximately 4,000 cases for drug offenses in 2019. That is a lot of matters. He didn't break down whether or not there were possession, trafficking, importation. But the point is, there are a lot of drug offenses in this matter. And if of that large sum, some of them is possession for productive people, for people in this society that, for lack of anything other than the fact that they just have a vice for the use of marijuana, but they're not violent people, they're not dishonest people. People that are seeking to make contributions, paying taxes, doing everything that is necessary to keep this country going. But their only vice is the use of 14 grams or less. The question is asked, looking at our laws, is this the best we can do to address an issue where the deterrent is a criminal conviction in circumstances where it is not relatively effective, because we're having these laws in place and persons still coming before the courts? So put it in layman terms, a man can do what he want to do regardless, because that's his voice. So this legislation here has at the core principle of it an issue of rehabilitation. So this government is not saying, oh, if that's his voice, let the fella do what he wants to do. No. We are not in the business of whether or not we want or don't want a person to use marijuana. We are not in the business of permitting them to use marijuana. That is not the table of discussion. All that is being recognized right now is that there is currently archaic laws in our system that have penalties in place that have the effect of detrimentally impacting people who do not necessarily have to be treated in that way anymore. That is all this is addressing. Changing not the legislation as it relates to the legality of weed, but specifically looking at the way in which persons are dealt with for breaches of the law. Now, the CARICOM Regional Commission on Marijuana, I had highlight a paragraph I just wanted to read out for the court. For the Senate. there is a part of the report which states that the analysis of the comprehensive information gathered indicates that the current legal regime for cannabis marijuana, characterized as it is by prohibition and draconian criminal penalties, is ineffective, incongruous, obsolete, and deeply unjust. That is out of the report from the Commission, which don't only focus on Barbados, focuses on the entire Caribbean region. And they concluded that information, which I just read to you. So this is not an issue that only affects Barbados. This is the entire region. Now, whereas in this bill, we are proposing not to change the existing legality of weed, but simply indicate that you're now receiving a fixed penalty of $200. Other parts of the region have actually had higher amounts for which a person would be able, let me phrase the term, a higher amount for which if a person is caught with that amount, they would receive the same penalty, or a penalty of a varying sum. But the point being, those persons, the limit is higher. In some parts of the region, it's 56 grams. Well, in my view, 14 grams is a lot. But 56 grams is almost double that, triple that. But the point being, if there's an understanding in each jurisdiction that there's a better way to deal with individuals, non-violent individuals, productive individuals, individuals who would not be before the lower courts, but not be it for their vice, that affects no one other than them, that but not be for those things, they would be normal, contributing individuals of society. And I think Senator Boyce highlighted it, and also Senator Springer, that those same persons, not for what we are attempting to do, today would have convictions on their records. So if they want to apply to go to sanitation, couldn't get a job. For all we know, one of the greatest scientists Barbados might not know of as yet might be in the habit of using marijuana under 14 grams. That might be his vice. But he might be on the brink of creating some new pattern, some new technology, some new sort of science that might enable Barbados to reach the next level. But he needs to send a job application. So because during his experimental phase at whatever school he went to, he might have followed his peers and used marijuana. And this is what I make a point here. 9 out of 10, the persons who use marijuana don't continue to use it for the rest of their life. That's why you have the experimental phases of your life. There are persons who know that they don't like alcohol because they try alcohol. There are persons who know they don't like marijuana because they try it. And they made a conscious decision, this is not for me. So if a person during the experimental phase of their life is unfortunately caught with it in their possession, that's it twice, chances are they will now have a conviction. So my scientific example now, the person who's a scientist, the example that I'm raising, he's one of those persons that are now caught with the substance twice. So the first time he threw himself in the mercy court, the second time they're going to have an excuse, and he has a conviction. He can't help the government of Barbados transcend to the next level because he has a conviction for something that he no longer uses, for something that he does not support, for something that all he did was try to experiment with it because of the peers he had maybe. And that's another thing that Barbados needs to realize. Peer pressure is not only direct, there's indirect peer pressure. I could come and hang out with you, and you don't necessarily have to tell me to use marijuana. But if I am in a grouping of people and I am the only person not using marijuana, I might not care enough about marijuana at all, but just to be in the in crowd, I decide I want to use it. Nobody forced me to do it, I choose to use it. But when I'm not with them, I'm a different person. I focus on what I need to do, and being productive and doing everything else. But when I'm with them, I'm a different person again. And it so happens on that one occasion, when I am with them, I am caught. And my whole life flashes before my eyes because of the mistakes that I've made during my experimental phase. it cannot be fair to our young people. And that's why I chose to speak this afternoon, because most of the senators addressed everything I had to say. But the reality is, as I am a young person, I interact with young people. I know exactly how they feel. I know the issues that they have. Some will say it vocally, some will just bear the brunt of the pressure and keep it moving. So I must be responsible and at least lend my voice to explain that this bill, all it does is to make sure that persons who decide that they will continue to use a voice, there's a rehabilitation element, so we're not condoning your behavior. But we're saying to you that in the event that you are caught with the 14 grams or less, we won't criminalize you. We won't record a conviction on your name. We can still recommend you to substance abuse counseling if necessary. We are still going to treat the drug as illegal. All we're doing is making sure that the consequence of your actions during an experimental phase, if it is during an experimental phase, does not haunt you for the rest of your life. That's all this straightforward bill deals with. Now, there was another thing that one of the senators had highlighted in his presentation. And it's normally a pleasure to listen to him speak, because I started to wonder. I know he said that he's a lot of things, piece of lawyer, piece of this. I also wonder if he's a fictional novelist, because a lot of what he presents is truth mixed with fiction. So I ask myself, is it intentional, or is he just exhibiting one of the true traits of a fictional novelist? I'm not certain. But I ask myself those questions, because he addressed one of the issues in the bill where he was saying that, I just made a note here, how police will know if it is cannabis when they're issuing the notice. And he attempted to try to stir the nest there to suggest that this bill will not create further issues for the police. But the reality is that without this bill, the police still operating as though the drugs is illegal, with or without the bill. The difference is that when the police confronts a person who they reasonably suspect to be in possession of marijuana, if that person says to the officer, well, this is breadfruit tree leaves or banana leaves, this is not illegal substance, that person would then have the right to say, well, look, I want to go court and defend this. The police officer would have to treat it like any ordinary matter, take the substance, have it analyzed, determine whether or not it is indeed an illegal substance, and then prosecute the person who then has to defend their position. With the bill, the situation is still the same. If the officer confronts me and tells me he suspects me to have marijuana, I will either tell him, officer, you're right, you get me, serve me my notice, and then go along my merry way. Or I will say, no, officer, I don't agree with you. And at that time, he's treated as though he is objecting to the situation, and thereby then he would then have to go through the prosecution process. Because he's saying he does not have marijuana, he's not accepting the notice as it stands because he disagrees. And therefore then he's challenging the situation. But in any of those scenarios, the police still has to verify if it becomes a contentious issue as to whether or not the substance in issue is marijuana. So it doesn't change the situation, Mr. President. And I just feel that's something that needs to be cleared up. No. Mr. President, as I indicated, there wasn't much more that I had to add to this debate, because I think that all of the other senators that spoke addressed all the issues, both from a social impact and an economic impact. So with those few words, Mr. President, I support this bill and I'm obliged to, sir.
Thank you, Senator Vistonino.
Thank you, Mr. President. As usual, I will be brief. Mr. President, having listened to the lawyers speak in this chamber, I'm a little bit confused. And I thought that by now it would have been clear to me whether when one is stopped by an officer of the law and he suspects that the vegetable substance you have is marijuana, and he gives you a ticket. If like a parking ticket, you can walk off with produce, or does he confiscate it? And I would like to have some clarity on that. Because if it is not, if you are paying a fine for the possession, well, do you keep it or do you surrender it? And, Mr. President, from a personal level, and I know that we are not debating whether marijuana is good for you or not, I have seen the effects of addiction in young people, and not how it only affects them, but their relatives. And sometimes the suffering doesn't end with the treatment, because the consequences of the addiction sometimes changes a person's life forever. Senator Sands, I believe, mentioned the effects of having a mark against you for employment by having a criminal conviction for drugs. But Mr. President, there are some jobs where I would like to remind everyone, your mark is not in the court, it's in your drug test. So whether you have a mark in the court or not, when you are tested and your drug requires for security reasons that you be clean, you will still not get the job. So it will not improve your employment prospects. So we must not stand here in this chamber and somehow make people believe that it lessens the problem. It does not. I don't believe, Mr. President, that it is unexpected that we would be here. I believe the day we sat and had a joint select committee on medical marijuana, that the logical steps were going to be sacrament, which happened, and I correctly anticipated that we would be brought a bill like this. I, at this late moment, am uncertain as to how I will vote, because I bear the scars of seeing what it does. So I will announce my abstention.
Thank you very much, Senator Nairdy. Senator Walcott.
Thank you, Mr. President. As I rise to wrap up the debate on this very interesting debate it has been, as expected, it speaks to people's sensitivities, people's concerns, health, legal, and the whole issue of values and things like that sort. I want to thank all the honorable members who have spoken. Very interesting perspectives from each of them, especially from, I believe it was Senator Rogers, and his issue of the person who might be stopped with having less than 14 grams, but being covered on another piece of legislation to carry that 14 grams. And certainly these things need to be addressed, and there's obviously some revising, reviewing and revising that would be necessary. And certainly Senator Boyce, who made some very important points, especially in terms of the messaging and the need to get the message right. The issue of financing for funding for NCSA. This is a matter that was raised when this was discussed earlier at Cabinet, I believe, in terms of giving NCSA the resources that would be necessary. And of course, making the point about going after the big fish. I think all in all, we are clear as it relates to this matter. I know it was going to be a sensitive matter. Mr. President, I said I want to thank all members who have spoken. Expecting, as I said at the outset, we've heard the evidence. I'm not going to go over it again as it relates to the punitive measures and the prohibition, if it is working or not. Mindful of the psychological effects and all of these things. But sometimes we have to make a choice. We the balance, we have to come to a conclusion. And I believe it's the government's perspective at this point in time that we want to be going in this direction. I want to therefore move that this bill be now passed a second time. Be now read.
The question is that this bill be now read a second time. Those honorable senators in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those against, please say no. We think the ayes have it. The question is that he do now leave the chair and the Honorable Senate is now submit to committee for further consideration of this bill. Those honorable senators in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. We think the ayes have it.
Senate is now in committee.
Clause 1.
Beg to move that clause 1 stand part.
The question is that clause 1 stand part. Honorable senators in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Clause 2.
The question is that clause 2 stand part. Honorable senators in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Clause 3.
Chairman, I beg to move that clause 3 stand part.
The question is that clause 3 stand part. Honorable senators in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Schedule.
Chairman, I beg to move that the schedule be the schedule to the bill.
The question is that the schedule be the schedule to the bill. Honorable senators in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Mr. Chairman, I beg to move that you do not report to His Honor the President the passing of one bill in committee.
The question is that I do now report to His Honor the President the passing of one bill in committee. Honorable senators in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
The chairman has just reported to me the passing of one bill in committee.
Mr. President, I beg to move that this bill be now read a third time.
The question is that this bill be now read a third time. Those honorable senators in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Mr. President, I beg to move that this bill do now pass and be cited as the Drug Abuse Prevention and Control Amendment Act 2021.
The question is that this bill do not pass and be cited as the Drug Abuse Prevention and Control Act 2021. Those honorable senators in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it. This bill is so passed and so cited.
Mr. President, we commit to presentation of papers.
Presentation of papers.
Mr. President, I'm commanded to lay the Barbados Economic and Social Report 2017 and the 16th Actuarial Review of the National Insurance Fund, Unemployment Fund, and Severance Fund as of December the 31st, 2017.
We commit, sir, to reports from select committees.
Before the Honourable Senate, I want to report that the Committee of Selection held a meeting on 25th of March 2021, and the full membership was present, and the matter was to consider nominations for the membership of committees of the Senate. And the proposal to the Honourable Senate is that there be a change in membership as follows. Senator Damian Sands will cease membership of the Standing Orders Committee and is nominated to serve on the Library Committee. And Senator Jerome Walker, who is a member of the Library Committee, will cease membership on that committee and be nominated to serve on the Standing Orders Committee. The proposals for that direct switch of membership were unanimously agreed to by members of the committee. The Committee of Selection hereby supports this report to the Honourable Senate for the change in membership of Standing Orders Committee and the Library Committee. Public business.
Order number 5, sir, in the name of the Honorable Leader of the Senate, to move the second reading of the Anti-Corruption and Anti-Terrorism Agency Bill 2021.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I will try to be fairly brief with this bill at this point in time. A lot has been said over the past few years about corruption in Barbados, and various accusations have been made over the years, especially over the last 10 years, culminating with the high-profile case of a former Barbadian government minister, being held in North America. Indeed, we have in Barbados had a Prevention of Corruption Act since 1929, which of course is quite dated and fairly archaic in areas. I know that all honorable members are familiar with the Integrity in Public Life Bill, which reached this honorable chamber in August last year. But this evening I am not here to deal with that. Our purpose here is a bill to provide for the establishment of an anti-corruption and anti-terrorism agency to investigate acts of corruption and terrorism and to provide for related matters. We think it is critical that we in Barbados now provide a dedicated mechanism and structure to investigate acts of corruption so that the corrupt parties can be brought to justice, and that so that the corrupt practices can be exposed. I say at the outset, and for the benefit of my honorable colleague on the other side, it is not the intention to strip the police of its investigative role and powers as far as corruption is concerned. However, it is very clear to all that there's need for a strong multidisciplinary team of experts with forensic skills in such areas as accounting, detection, and interdiction, and who will be able to make an impact in rooting out corruption in a way that the Royal Barbados Police Force has not been able to do so thus far. Hence, the agency will be responsible for the investigation of corrupt practices, the preparation of case files, while the power of arrest will still remain with the Royal Barbados Police Force. Obviously, it will be important for the agency to be made up of individuals with expert training and also of individuals of impeccable character. And obviously, they'll be required to undergo polygraph testing, etc., at the standard intervals so as to ensure the integrity of that agency. Given the limited resources available in Barbados and available here to the country, it is considered that with these requires specialist skills, it will be important for this agency to also have a concomitant focus on terrorism risk and potential terrorist activity. Hence, it is being called the Anti-Corruption and Anti-Terrorism Agency. In this regard, it will also work collaboratively with the RBPF and the Financial Intelligence Unit. Mr. President, in Part 2, you can see the principles are 3. The principal objects of the Act: A, to establish an agency which will have sufficient operational independence and autonomy and be dedicated to combating corruption and terrorism in collaboration with strategic partners and law enforcement agencies, whether within or outside of Barbados. It is expected it will promote the strengthened measures for the prevention, detection, investigation, and prosecution of corruption and terrorism, and to thereby enhance public confidence so that the perpetrators of corruption and terrorism will be brought to justice without undue delay, and indeed promote and protect public safety and national security. And under the functions, Clause 5, the functions of the agency, subject to provisions of the bill, they will carry out efficient and effective activities to combat corruption and terrorism, whether by itself or in collaboration with strategic partners and law enforcement agencies. It will implement measures for the prevention, detection, reduction, and mitigation of the consequences of corruption and terrorism. It will receive complaints in relation to alleged or suspected acts involving corruption and terrorism. It will investigate alleged or suspected acts involving corruption and terrorism, prosecute offenses relating to corruption and terrorism, gather, store, process, analyze, and disseminate information that is relevant to activities to combat corruption and terrorism, collaborate, cooperate, and coordinate intelligence and other activities with any other person or authority, whether within or outside Barbados, in order to prevent, detect, reduce, or investigate corruption and terrorism, and carry out other such functions as may be conferred on the agency. And of course, it is expected that there would be a Director General of the agency, and the bill speaks in various clauses to the functions. Clause 4 speaks to the establishment of the agency and the functions as I just covered. Clause 7 speaks to the ability of the Commissioner of Police to refer for investigations to the agency. Clause 11 speaks to the cooperation of the agency with other bodies. Clause 14 speaks to administration and provides the appointment of the Director General, and provides 15 speaks for disqualification. So that clauses 4 to 23 essentially deal with the issue of administration and going as far as dealing with the obligations of secrecy. Clauses 24 to 32 deal with the financial provisions, plans, and reporting system. And Part 6, clauses 34 to 38 speak of the oversight committee to have oversight over the functioning. Mr. President, I believe the bill is fairly straightforward. It is one that is indeed needed. Some would say it is long overdue. And with these few words, I beg that this bill be now read a second time. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Walker. Senator Franklin.
Mr. President, thank you, sir. I would be equally brief. One, I'm tired. And yeah. And I was here going back over my old notes from the pesticide thing, because I thought, but what do I know do? She's on very tired, but this may take her to be tired, I'm going to be tired next time. Mr. President, I have no difficulty with the purposes of this bill. All right? And I am not the government. So my position would be style, as opposed to that there's something wrong with having this legislation in place. Right? I would do it differently. I would give the resources to the police, because we already have structures there that you can build on, rather than set up a separate and distinct agency. The Commissioner of Police still has all the powers that this act has given to the Director General and everybody else. So now we have two people with the same powers and they can do the same thing. Mind you, the act says that the Commissioner of Police can defer to him and let him do the investigation. But why would the police, who are the experts in investigating? You know? No, that's what I'm saying. You should give the resources to the police so that you can have, because police are not just traffic people, stop traffic, direct traffic, go and check a couple of fellows who beat people or go and catch a couple of murderers. A lot of these young policemen nowadays are very bright, you know. There's some policemen I know, even one that was providing security here last time around, he has degree people got degrees and stuff. They're not idiots. So you were looking at the days when police used to be, the qualification was you had to 5'8", you know? That'd be 5'8", and very little more after that. That's not the police force that we have nowadays, but we are treating them that way. All of these things, and you are now setting up another structure, pay a lot of money to give people powers that the police already have. Why not give the police the resources? Send some of the officers who I know are very well equipped. I speak with them to do exactly what you're asking these people to do. And then maybe you might have a real purpose for another deputy commissioner of police. You ain't got none now. But so that is my real take on it. I don't understand why you have to go through this anti-corruption unless there's some treaty that you people sign. You know, you always go there signing treaties and then we find out later that you had to do these things. Because we got some young, bright policemen out there, and sometimes they get so frustrated because they leave the force. Now, if you challenge, these fellas are not challenged, a lot of policemen usually go and become lawyers. You know, they're not idiots. You could have given them the resources, give the Commissioner of Police the resources and the necessary training, and you would have the expertise in investigation and everything else, then the financial skills and stuff that you want them to have. So be it. You know, my other difficulty with this bill is over here in the sections where you're dealing with penalties. The general penalties, you deal with, on summary conviction, $100,000 out of imprisonment for 5 years. This is for individuals. Or on conviction and indictment for a fine of $250,000 or imprisonment for 10 years. In the case of a body corporate, summary conviction, a fine of $150,000, and conviction and indictment, a fine of $500,000. You see, no company in Barbados can bribe anybody. The officers of the company can. The company itself cannot involve itself in corruption. The officers of the companies do. So, I don't think that they should tear their way out alone. Not that the Treasury wouldn't like the $500,000, I would like it too. But I believe that officers of these companies who are corrupt and get involved in these matters should spend some time at Her Majesty's pleasure. That is the difficulty I have with this, but because an individual does something that a company does, but the individual gets to go to jail and rest nicely and get his scurvy or whatever else he gets up there. But but an officer of a company who does the identical thing, his company pays a fine and he walks away scot-free. He might get fired eventually or whatever else might happen, but I feel that somebody else should face those gates for doing what an individual can do. That's one of the main things that I have difficulty with. People get away. I can incorporate now and get away with crime. I can just call myself Caswell Franklin Inc. And I can start bribing politicians all over the place. I can register as a company, and then I can go out there and I can bribe people. I feel, because I will not be an individual then, because, you know, a company is a person. I 43. I read it. I probably didn't understand it then. No, it says here. Look at the last section. It says here it can be punished in accordance with A or B, and B deals with corporations, and A deals with the individual. So that's what I'm talking about. I read it, and then, unless I misunderstand, that's my interpretation. But you know, I am a lawyer. People tell me so I think. You know, so I'm of the view that we should be locking up principal officers of the companies, directors, and CEOs and that kind of thing too. Right? That is my take on the bill. The minor thing that I'm concerned about is the definition. The definition of corruption. Section 2. Corruption means an offense under any enactment related to corruption. There's something wrong with that. Yeah. I don't know. I'm not as I say, I'm not a lawyer, so I don't know. I don't understand the legalese of this. But it basically says corruption means corruption. You know. And then the other minor thing, but the minor too, is the Director General here now would be required to investigate political problems to maybe have treating at election time. You're not going to hear that's corrupt. When you give people food or T-shirts and that kind of stuff, because that's corruption too. No, I'm talking about the ones that we had vote in St. George North with pictures by them, all kind of thing. I saw them. I didn't have any. That T-shirt I bought myself. All right, so you see, I bought them myself. I bought mine myself. But I saw people out there walking about with little pretty shirts, and you know the Section 10A of the, I remember it now, it is the Election Offences and Controversies Act, 10A. That was passed in the 80s, in 1980, by a Barbers Day Party administration that banned the wearing of T-shirts and giving out T-shirts and stuff. Man, when I had 1 million T-shirts in George North. I even get some. All right? I didn't wear them. I used them to. So, you see why I like him? The relevance to this is that there's political corruption too. Some minor, some major. And if we, in this House, in this Senate, and start dealing with corruption, we got to deal with our own. You know? And if there's a piece of legislation that say you can't do certain things to get elected, but you do them regardless. And I can assure you, you can run an election with $10 per elector. We did it in St. Thomas when I was campaign manager, and we won. I am talking about the Sir David, not the other people. So I can assure you that you can run the campaign and follow the rules and win. But not when you have these creative, what do you call them? When you report to the chief electoral officer your expenses, that you declare your expenses. I have seen in the last administration, not this one, because I didn't check your paperwork this time, we had a situation where MPs did not have a telephone in their office, they didn't pay for any. They didn't have a poster or anything like that. So that too is a corrupt practice. That too is false. So are we not going to see investigations being done by this agency, or it's still going to be in the hands of a public officer who is acting and threatening to deal with politicians, so they don't bring a case against a politician for overspending or treating? You can't give food, you can't give money, but you know these things happen. So are they going to be included in this legislation too, because, or under the duties of the Director General? Because it doesn't say in the definition which act. It is out for interpretation, or it's out for, under section 2, corruption means an offense under any enactment related to corruption. So are we going to be seeing now real investigations into what causes politicians to get here? We're not here in the other place, because we get here at the will of the political leaders, Prime Minister and Leader of the Opposition, and in cases of independent senators, the Governor General. But we know the kind of expenditure, because it is $10 per elector. And we know the cost of those fancy stages that you put up are far more than any $10 could pay for. Because if you have 6,000 people in your constituency, you only spend 60,000. And I know the cost of one of those stages was $74,000. Some time ago that I was involved in politics. No, I'm not. So are we going to be seeing that type of investigation? Or are we only going to be thinking about people who bribe civil servants or bribe politicians or bribe? I want to know what's happening, because we cannot legislate and for others and not for ourselves. The rain must fall on the just and the unjust. Mm-hmm. So I hope when this legislation gets the nod, is proclaimed, that we see an independent Director General who asks for no favors and give none to his job or her job, as the case may be. As I said, sir, I have no difficulty in trying to stamp out corruption, because this place is getting like Sicily. There's corruption all over the place. Just to give an example, one day I am home and my stepdaughter comes to me and says, the garbage man is outside. He want to know if we had trimmed off some leaves and stuff. He want to know if we can get some money to cut on them bikes. So I said to him, you go quickly before you call the sanitation department for you. Because I am not prepared to bribe anybody. Mind you, I give them stuff at Christmas. I give them stuff at things. Like the other day somebody gave me, around Christmas time, people gave me gifts. And I got 3 bottles of Johnny Walker Black Label. I don't know what to do with it. I don't rub with it. And so there were 3 people on the truck, and I gave each of them one. My father said, if you get them Black Label, you could have given me them, and they would give you a whole case of Coxbury to get them fellas. I saw all this burn in mind. So it makes no difference to me. So I give them things. Sometimes, but I don't expect them to come and try to extort anything from me. That is corruption too, and it comes from there to very high up. I cannot say all the way up because I don't know all the way up, but I can tell you about the things that I see. And, it is also corrupt to go for a license at the licensing authority, and don't go and do the test, but come back and a few months later you kill somebody or something because you get the test. And I understand that there's a named person who you can go to and do your thing, and you don't have to go up on the road. That's corruption too. And it's worse corruption because you put a fellow on the road that ain't really know how to drive, and he could hit somebody, or worse yet, hit me. You know? So we need to look at the level of corruption in this place, because as far as I can see, this place is absolutely corrupt. People have offered me, as a trade unionist, I go to represent people. And next thing you hear, I am offered hotel rooms, dinners. And I saw one guy who offered me a room, I could come and get a room anytime. I said, but my wife don't like hotel sheets, so it wouldn't make no sense. You know, and when we travel, obviously my wife take along her own sheets, spread the beds with them. So I said, well, it wouldn't make no sense me coming on there then to bring sheets and stuff. We start home. But unless you didn't want it for my wife. But but I've been offered money to not push the case hard enough. You know? And poor me. And I see that I'm poor. So people think that might catch me. But it might catch some other trade unionists. I'm not prepared to call any names. I say it might catch other trade unionists, but it will not catch me. But it will, but the fact that a fellow was bold enough to offer it to me, I'm offered dinners. You know, come here, so man, if you can get whatever you want, you just come in and you sign me, you leave, and all kind of stuff. My signature, and if I want lobster, I can buy it or do without. But you have to be so corruption ain't only taking big sacks of money. It is. I've been working elsewhere, you know, and my boss tell me, man, you don't gotta push your case so hard. That's my friend. That's corruption too. You know, and I said, but if your friend tell you that he's wrong, you don't friend this worker. You know who got fired? Not the worker, me. So, sir, I am happy that we are trying to take some action, but I just think you're doing it wrong, differently than I would. But I'm not going to say that you're wrong. I'm just saying that I would have done it a different way. And, sir, with those very few remarks, I'm obliged to you, sir.
Thank you very much, Senator Franklin. Senator Walker.
Thank you, Mr. President. I want to thank my colleague on the other side for his brevity and his support for this. I understand his concern. He said he would have done it differently. He raised an issue about he didn't know if we had signed any convention. My little research has shown that we on to the United Nations Convention Against Corruption on December the 10th, 2003. We are now one of 11 countries in the world that have not ratified this convention. And looking at the ratification, it speaks to the need to have a body agency, and these must be independent, adequately resourced, and have properly trained staff. Okay? So, Mr. President, with those few remarks, I want to beg that this bill be now read a second time.
Thank you, Senator Walcott. The question is that this bill be now read a second time. Those honourable senators in favour, please say aye. Aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Mr. President, I beg to move that Your Honour do now leave the chair and the Senate resolve itself into committee for further consideration of this bill.
The question is that he do not leave the chair, the Honourable Senate resolve itself into committee for further consideration of this bill. Those honourable senators in favour, please say aye. Aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
The Senate is now in committee.
Clause 1.
Chairman, I beg to move that clause 1 stand part.
The question is that clause 1 stand part. Honorable senators in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Clause 2.
Chairman, I beg to move that clause 2 stand part.
The question is that clause 2 stand part. Honorable senators in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Clause 3.
Chairman, I beg to move that clause 3 stand part.
The question is that clause 3 stand part. Honorable senators in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it. There's no objection to doing it in parts.
Part 2, clauses 4 to 33.
Chairman, I beg to move that part 2 clauses 4 to 33 stand part.
The question is that part 2, clauses 4 to 33 stand part. Honorable senators in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Part 3, clauses 14 to 23.
Part 3.
Sorry, something wrong, sir.
This clause is part 2.
Part 2,
clauses 4 to 13.
13.
13.
To 13.
13, sir.
Let's do that again. Part 2.
Clauses 4 to 13.
The question is that part 2, clauses 4 to 13 stand part. Honorable senators in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Part 3, clauses 14 to 23.
The question is that part 3, clauses 14 to 23 stand part. Honorable senators in favor.
Mr. President, I beg to move that part 3 clauses 14 to 23 stand part.
The question is that part 3, clauses 14 to 23 stand part. Honorable senators in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Part 4, clauses 24 through 32.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to move that part 4, clauses 24 to 32 stand part.
The question is that part 4, clauses 24 to 32 stand part. Honorable senators in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Part 5, clause 33.
Chairman, I beg to move that part 5, clause 33 stand part.
The question is that part 5, clause 33 stand part. Honorable senators in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Part 6, clauses 34 to 38.
Mr. Chairman, I beg to move that part 6, clauses 34 to 38 stand part.
The question is that part 6, clauses 34 to 38 stand part. Honorable senators in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Part 7, clauses 39 and 40.
Chairman, I beg to move that part 7, clauses 39 and 40 stand part.
The question is that part 7, clauses 39 and 40 stand part. Honorable senators in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Part 8, clauses 41 to 43.
Mr. Chairman, I beg to move that part 8, clauses 41 to 43 stand
The
part.
question is that part 8, clauses 41 to 43 stand part. Honorable senators in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Part 9, clauses 44 to 49.
Mr. Chairman, I beg to move that part 9, clauses 44 to 49 stand part.
The question is that part 9, clauses 44 to 49 stand part. Honorable senators in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
The first schedule.
Mr. Chairman, I beg to move that the first schedule be the first schedule to the bill.
The question is that the first schedule be the first schedule to the bill. All honorable senators in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Second schedule.
Mr. Chairman, I beg to move that the second schedule would be the second schedule to the bill.
The question is that the second schedule be the second schedule to the bill. Honorable senators in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Third schedule.
Mr. Chairman, I beg to move that the third schedule be the third schedule to the bill.
The question is that the third schedule be the third schedule to the bill. Honorable senators in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Or,
Mr. Chairman, I beg to move that you do not report His Honor the President the passing of one bill in committee.
The question is that I do now report to His Honor the President the passing of one bill in committee. Honorable senators in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
The chairman has just reported to me the passing of one bill in committee.
Mr. President, I beg to move that this bill be now read a third time.
The question is that this bill be now read a third time. Those honorable senators in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Mr. President, I beg to move that this bill do not pass and be cited as the Anti-Corruption and Anti-Terrorism Agency Act 2021.
The question is that this bill do not pass and be cited as the Anti-Corruption and Anti-Terrorism Agency Act 2021. Those honorable senators in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it. This bill is now passed and so cited.
Leader of the Senate to move the second reading of the Pesticides Control Amendment Bill 2020.
Senator Walkers.
Thank you, Mr. President. A very straightforward bill. I believe it has to do with the important Pesticides Control Act, which regulates pesticides coming into the country, the origin, the way they get here, and of course looking at the science of them and the research. The purpose of the bill is to, in effect, make two amendments. That the Chief Agricultural Officer will to replace the Deputy Chief Agricultural Officer as the Chairman of the Pesticides Control Board, and also making an amendment to provide now for a proposal that to make provision for the post of a Registrar of Pesticides. As I understand it, in the past, as I said, the Deputy Chief Agricultural Officer had responsibility for this, and it has occurred that the office of the Deputy Chief Agricultural Officer may not always be held by a person trained in pest and pesticide management. And they plan in transferring the chairmanship of the Pesticides Control Board from the Deputy Chief to the Chief Agricultural Officer or his or her nominee would allow the ministry to utilize persons within the ministry or elsewhere who possess the requisite skills and experience in pest and pesticide management in order that they can function more effectively. And then that is, in a nutshell, what this simple amendment is looking to do. It also speaks to a registrar, and the registrar will now be part of the process and would be responsible for general supervision of inspectors, keep and maintain a register of licenses, of pesticides, and register of toxic chemicals. And this person would be responsible for entering into the registers the information specified by the regulations, and give to the inspectors information and instructions and directions as necessary when they do their various assessments, etc. As I said, this is fairly straightforward, and they were using the experience in Trinidad and Tobago and Jamaica in the region as a basis for developing this, doing it at this way, recognizing the limitations sometimes in a small island in terms of available resources in a specific area. This will give them some flexibility. And so I beg to move that this bill be now read a second time.
Senator Franklin.
Sir, thank you very much. As Senator Walker said, this is a short bill, and I think too short. When I heard that we were having an amendment to the pesticide control, it was my last year. I thought that we were going to be reviewing what was happening with the pesticides you see in Barbados, and with a view to making sure that there's more control over what we get in Barbados and people use. And I would have been excited by it, and I was planning to go and do all kind of fancy research about the pesticide effect on the water, and all kind of stuff. Only then to find out that this bill is just to find jobs for a few people. I was surprised that we got too much problems with pesticides in Barbados, and the government the only thing they can deal with pesticides is to find a couple of jobs, and God knows for who. I say I would not try to empower models and say that they are full friends or something. So sir, I'm learning well from you. So So I'm hoping that this is the first amendment to the pesticides control bill because let me give an example. You go on the shelves, you can go at a certain hardware place to buy anything, and you will see some little pesticides pour into bottles and put some labels on them and stuff. And but I always go up on the campaign now because God bless Google. A lot of these things are banned in the countries of origin. Can't be used there, but they sell them in Barbados, and we use them willy-nilly. Some of them are cause cancer. Carcinogenic, I think that's the word they use. Thank you, sir. And we have them here. You can buy them off the shelf. You don't need a license. You don't need anything. And people are going to take them and spray them on the street. I see people walking around in slippers, no protective gear, spraying Roundup and all kind of stuff at the front doors, and the grandchildren around the yard later on in the day. If Roundup gets to me, all my tonsils get inflamed and all kind of stuff. I can't go close to it. Right? But no, you get it. And there are other products in Barbados. There's one that you give, I can't remember the name now, but it's a poison. And if you give it to the rats and the cat catch that, right, the cat gone too. And these things are so dangerous. I understand that is banned now too, but they were here all along. Not Gramoxone. There's I can't remember the name now, but it was one. Everybody wanted to get this poison because it was really good. You put it outside there, and all to kill the rat around the fowl pens. Man, every bird that passed on there used to have holes that the birds shit around the place. It was very deadly. Pardon? So I want better control of these drugs. And I hope that since now we're having all these people that actually will be people who have expertise in dealing with these matters, and pesticide control boards don't just sign off on pesticides that come into this country. We know the industrialized countries, they make a lot of stuff and they set for export only. I remember, like for instance, and I'm not going to call the country's name because I think we got nice we don't want to send our new ambassador up there. But they produce, what do you call it? Thing used to put on the roof. Asbestos. It is banned in that country, but they sell it to Indian man by the thousands of tons. You know, they produce it for themselves, but not for themselves. They produce it. They know it is bad. They say it is bad and it cannot be used in their countries, but they sell it here, and we accept it. These are the pesticides that go into the water, and next thing you know, we hear a lot of cancer, and we do not know where it's coming from. Because yes, there's an acceptable level of some of these pesticides, but by the time you get to that acceptable level, you know, it may be acceptable by world standards or whatever else that you might have, but it is still causing harm. And we need to get a regime where you can't drink the water, because our water, for the most part, comes from the aquifer. So let's say you have people spraying fields with these chemicals. Innocuous, don't look nothing happening, but 10, 15 years down the road, you got all kinds of cancers, and you don't know where you get it from, because you don't smoke, you don't drink, you don't do all these kind of things. You run every evening, and then next thing you know, you live a good life, but you know the water poisoning you. Not that our water has reached that stage, but I don't want to get there. So I want to see more rigor in enforcing those bans, and make sure that we have some bans, because any country that produces a pesticide and then say they can't use it, we shouldn't take it either. But they're retailed in small packages in stores, and these things are deadly. So, sir, you know, as I said, this bill. It's not harmful. You're setting up a regime of giving some people jobs now. That's all this is about, you know. But I want to see more. I wanted to come in here and talk about the effects of pesticides on the human body, and the nitrates and the nitrites that go into the water. And cause I do all that kind of research, and then when I hear that they're going to have this pesticide, I hadn't seen it first. So I went and I rush and I went and learned up all this stuff, only to be disappointed to find out that you're only looking to get somebody jobs. Sir, I'm disappointed. But I hope that we will take my suggestion and and do a more in-depth analysis of the pesticides and the poisons generally that we bring into this country. So with this minor intervention, sir, I'm very grateful to you.
Thank you very much. Senator Nurse. Senator Nurse.
You got the mix right, think so? You got the mix right, think so?
Thank you, Mr. President. I shall be equally as brief, in fact, probably more brief. And I have to say, Mr. President, that I do agree with the leader, with the opposition in this regard in terms of this amendment. I believe I was really looking for a lot more here. I think that any legislation relating to the whole control and regulation of pesticides is absolutely important legislation and should not be treated lightly. We appreciate, of course, that pesticides, while they can be very useful, particularly we know of the use in agriculture and so on, they can have serious negative effects on the human bodies, on the environment, particularly we're talking about effects on the land, air, or water systems, marine life. So all of these things makes it necessary to implement really good legislation, but also to make sure that we have a really proper regime of control and monitoring and enforcement. And so this pesticides control bill has been around for a little while now. I think perhaps back since the 70s, I think, or if not earlier. And so it have been a really good opportunity to take a look at the overall bill and to see how the act and to see how it could have been modernized and improved where necessary. And that's important because over time, a number of things can change. We know, for example, trading systems, international agreements and arrangements and so on affect the importation and the sale of various pesticides and chemicals. We know, for example, and I think Senator Franklin may have mentioned that you have in some countries certain chemicals or pesticides, as the case may be, which are banned, but yet they can be exported to other countries. And so from time to time, we always have to make sure that our legislation is updated to make sure that this level of regulation to ensure that if something is not good enough to be used or consumed in another country, it should not be good enough to be imported into this country. And I think that one of the useful things, because there's a lot of resources, that are necessary in order to really properly manage this whole, the whole area of pesticides control. And I'm thinking that I don't know that Barbados on its own would have all the resources, but perhaps the time has come where there's some CARICOM agency that can work together to make sure that we are not being used as a dumping ground for chemicals and various other and pesticides and so on that may very well be banned in other countries. So we should be a kind of a collaborative effort here, I think, among us in the Caribbean to make sure that we are not being taken advantage of in this regard. Mr. President, one thing I looked at in the amendment itself really is the constitution of the committee itself, of the board, the control board, and it seems to me that the board itself seems to be lacking in certain in representation of certain key regulatory departments. I am thinking particularly of the EPD, the Environmental Protection Department. Tremendous expertise in that department, being called upon all the time to investigate all of the various environmental issues which arise for all kinds of reasons. And I cannot see why they should not be, and to my mind, they should be a key, they should have representation and be key members of this board. In fact, I think I would probably even make the case, Mr. President, that the EPD director should probably be the chair of the board rather than the chief agricultural officer. And I say that, Mr. President, because while we know that the lots of chemicals are used in the agricultural industry, I think it is really the EDP department and their chief who really have the scientific and other training and knowledge, which is really critical and is probably necessary as part of this board. Coastal Zone Management Unit 2 perhaps should be represented on this board. As you know, again, they have responsibility for the management of the coastal and marine resources. And again, a lot of environmental issues can arise there. We know that, for example, pesticides and chemicals can have severe impacts on our coral reefs and so on. And there again, I think that Coastal Zone Management Unit should probably also be represented on the board. And we could also suggest, for example, the Ministry of Labor. And you will ask why. I mean, we are talking about several health issues which can affect people, workers in various industries, again in agriculture and other industries, people who have to use these chemicals, and therefore environmental safety and health would be important to have that input in terms of the labor, to make sure that their concerns are also addressed when making decisions by this board. I too would like to know, what is the position. This is not now directly related to the pesticides control as such, but well, it is related in a way. I'm talking about the rezoning of the island into the various zones, because we know that obviously our groundwater supply can severely be affected by chemicals and the fertilizers and so on in agriculture, which seep into the earth and affect our groundwater supply. Now, I know the Prime Minister spoke to the fact that they were looking, that work is ongoing in terms of rearranging reordering the whole zoning system of the island. And so I would like to throw out the question as to where we are in terms of completing that process. The present system, for example, the present system for zoning system only speaks to bacteria, for example, and viruses getting into the ground, affecting the groundwater supply. It doesn't speak to to chemicals seeping into the groundwater supply. So again, and that's why I'm raising that point. And so I think that, Mr. President, while I commend this first step in terms of amending the legislation, I think there's a lot more that has to be done, and a lot more upgrading, and I look forward to seeing the necessary legislation come on board. But I support this first step in this amending the legislation. I am obliged to you, Mr. President.
Thank you very much, Senator Nurse. Senator Miller.
Thank you, Mr. President. I do not need to comment on brevity. Mr. President, the Pesticide Control Board will no doubt regulate what comes in, but it has no control over stocks that already exist. So you may have stocks of chemicals that are declared, Mr. President, but there are lots of chemicals around that are undeclared. Sometimes they are abandoned. And those are the ones that probably pose the most danger. The greatest fear, Mr. President, about pesticides is that they will affect animals and humans. But probably most often the pathway is through our water supply. And we must therefore seriously consider whether on the board we have the most knowledgeable persons to advise on water. I cannot imagine, as Senator Nurse said, that among the two persons whom the minister may appoint, there should not be a person from the EPD and someone representing water, because the contamination of our water supply is the greatest fear. And it would make no sense to have a fancy board and we do not know what has happened to our water supply. I am certain that the idea behind this ultimately is attached to water. And we cannot desal for everyone. Because when the power goes off, Mr. President, you cannot desalinate. So we still have to protect our groundwater. Mr. President, I'm obliged to.
Thank you very much, Senator Drakes.
Sir, thank you for allowing me the opportunity to speak. I'll speak very briefly. And it is to just say quickly that the public may not know this, but the Environmental Protection Department does do a lot of work as it relates to the regulation of pesticides, any chemicals that are being brought into the country. There is a registration that is done. There is the Pesticides Control Board, as Senator Maynard noted. And sir, I also wanted to state publicly that we are signed on to the Stockholm Convention since 2004, which deals with persistent organic pollutants. And within that set of chemicals, I would say, and sir, just for clarification, persistent organic pollutants are those toxins that stay within our ecosystems for a very long time. They pass on from, as is being said, from water to animals, and then we then ingest them when we eat and consume the animals. And particularly as it relates to our stockpiles and waste for persistent organic pollutants, pesticides. All of the stockpiles were removed in 2016 in conjunction between the EPD and the Food and Agricultural Organization. So there is, and that inventory as it relates to stockpiles and waste, that inventory is done periodically. And I know the registration list is also updated once the relevant scientific information is there to realize that there is a danger with a particular toxin, with a particular chemical, and then that goes through that process of being added to the inventory. Or it is removed if we know for sure that globally the production has stopped with that toxin or chemical. And I also want to support Senator Nurse's comments as it relates to being vigilant with how we utilize toxins and chemicals, particularly in our agricultural industry sector, because when it comes to the degradation of our coral reefs, agricultural runoff is a significant contributor to the degradation, as I said, of our coral reefs. And if we are talking about building out a blue economy, we cannot be on one hand on land, engaging in activities that degrade the reef, harm the reef, and then in another aspect, trying to build out an economy that is still relying on that said ecosystem. So there needs to be a balance that is had as it relates to how we're utilizing certain resources and their impact on the environment. Mr. President, I said I will be brief. I just wanted to raise those points, and I know there will be an opportunity for me to speak at length about these issues. So I'm obliged to you, sir.
Thank you, Senator Drakes. Senator, any other speakers? Oh, Senator Greenwich, Mr. Deputy President. Yes, that's true.
As I usually am.
Thanks.
Mr. President, it is imperative that this particular statute cap, I think it's 395, that it be always up to date, that it be always smart, and that it be always what you call present day. These are very, very important statutes, sir, because it helps us to control the distribution, the classification, the sale, and the use of some very deadly, dangerous, and extremely harmful pesticides, which can damage our people's health, indeed can do permanent damage to people's health. Mr. President, you should not be able to purchase pesticides in Barbados in the same way that you go to a supermarket and purchase a loaf of bread. Sir, no pesticide should be imported in this country and have us guessing as to whether it is safe for us to use or not. We shouldn't guess. Sir, we should always know as much as possible about the pesticides which we use. We do not want a situation, Mr. President, where dangerous pesticides, as Senator Franklin and Senator Drakes and Senator Nurse have said, where pesticides banned in places like USA and Canada and the United Kingdom are allowed into Barbados. And if we continue to do something like this, if it is not monitored, sir, we could end up putting our people at risk. So we cannot stress the fact, therefore, that we must be guided always by our own rules, our own regulations, and our own standards where pesticides are concerned. We must remember that what is acceptable in places like India, places like Mexico, wherever, will not necessarily be accepted in Barbados. Thankfully, Mr. President, I don't think we've ever had a serious case in Barbados where a dangerous pesticide got away and did enough damage to harm our population. And in so saying, sir, I think we should big up an agency such as our BNSI that has worked over the years to make sure that not only pesticides, but a lot of the goods that we import into this country meet a particular standard. We have to make sure that the products made available to Barbadians are authentic products. That the little things, I think it was Senator Franklin again that mentioned it, like the language and so on that we see written on these pesticides that all of that is intelligible. Sir, this, as I said, this legislation must always be up to date, because there are things which we formerly used, which today are now shown to be dangerous. Those of us who watch a lot of US television will recall seeing quite recently an ad saying, if you have used the product Roundup, you have been experiencing the following symptoms and so on, contact the law offices of such and such, because you may be entitled to financial compensation. You see that we were using it, the same Roundup, and they're getting some big dollars out there because it has given some of the population cancer and whatnot. So you always have to keep on top of this. But the main reason for this legislation, sir, is to ensure that as far as possible, our system here is safe and free from abuse. I want to make the point quickly too, sir, that there's always that small group of individuals whose sole motivation is something called money. Money. And money means more to them, sir, than my life or your life. And there are some persons who will still want to deal in dangerous pesticides as long as there is an opening for them to do so. As long as there's a market for that product. They do not care who it harms. As long as you'll buy it from them, they will sell it to you. Even though those pesticides may be potentially harmful to our environment, and as most people have said, sir, to our water supply. Because, sir, this is an area that needs a lot of checks and balances, and therefore, I hope that the board will find it necessary to make sure that none of this happens in our country. So I even have to skip some of my notes because I know that time is late and getting on. A lot of the persons who sell pesticides, sir, should be acting as our first line of defense, the first line of defense for the public. Because the do's and the don'ts can be of extreme importance. And the ones who are allowed to sell pesticides should be able, Mr. President, to advise us as to whether we are purchasing the correct pesticide for our problem or not. Persons should be able to give you the instructions for safe handling, and they should be able to advise you as to whether that particular pesticide can be harmful to your neighbor, because you could be concentrating on killing the weeds over by you, but you might end up killing your neighbor. And sir, I don't even mean a neighbor who has some problem with allergies and so on. I'm speaking about an ordinary fit person like me or you, Mr. President. I know, sir, right now there are 4 matters in the law court that I know of. 2 of them deal with a person who spray painting of cars next door. And the other 2 deals with pesticides. They are right there in the court. Those matters I know of. Indiscriminate and insensitive use of pesticides in Barbados, I know it has destroyed good neighboring relationships. One lady I know, she remains adamant to this day that the pesticide sprayed from her next door neighbor is what caused her to end up in the psychiatric hospital. She's positive that there's nothing else wrong with her. The only thing was the neighbor. But the point, sir, is that no matter, Mr. President, no matter how we tweak this particular piece of legislation, we will never be able to rescue each and every user from himself. You can tweak it till tomorrow, make it as fresh as whatever. You can't save everybody. So these amendments, sir, will not be a game changer for those who use pesticides as though they don't care about their own safety. It will not be a game changer for them. Sir, there will be those who will read what they say on the tin or the bottle or whatever, and no matter how we attempt to regulate the pesticides and try as hard as we can, with the best will in the world, we can't stop them from doing what they do. You'll see that the thing may mark avoid contact with skin. It may mark that do not inhale. And there will be people who will read it, look at it and read it, and they will still be spraying in a short sleeve t-shirt. Mark do not. It mark to avoid contact with skin. But and they will still have on a short pants. They'll still have on a pair of slippers. And they'll be spraying, and you know, it says don't inhale, but they won't have on a mask. So don't care what we do, you're going to find that particular person. They're very casual about it, and it is difficult to get them from break out of that habit that they have. You know, it's a bad habit. And such mistakes can be extremely costly, can even be deadly, Mr. President. And some of these pesticides are so strong. I remember a good friend of mine, Mr. Senator Miller knows him perhaps better than I do. And he was working at one of these pest control places, the place that sells pesticides. And he showed us one day that if he sprayed a particular point at St. Catherine's pasture on the ground, on the playing field, that no grass would grow there for 3 years. And you could tell, Mr. President, at the end of 5 years, grass still had not grown on that particular place. It's a fact. True, true, true. At the end of 5 years, grass still had not grown there. Very, very powerful. I don't even know if it's growing today. Some pesticides are so strong that they can be used. We know to commit suicide. People have done it here in Barbados, committed suicide by using pesticides. They're very, very. And I know another person, he has used it to kill any stray animal that go into his kitchen garden. He deliberately puts the poison there with pesticides just to kill the animals. So, and we don't need graphs and pressure point or PowerPoint and those things to prove these things. Some things that you see happening every day. And so there's another reason why you have to know who is purchasing these products and from whom. But sir, I have to say that, you know, we have gone a lot now doing, what's the term you use now to organic. A lot of people are moving to the organic thing. I don't think that the pesticides may be as widely used as before, and it might be a good thing. But sir, as I said, I don't want to be long. I think I've gone on a bit longer than I expected. And sir, so I do agree with the legislation. I think it has to do with the health of Barbadians, and I commend this bit of legislation to the House. I'm grateful, sir.
Thank you very much, Deputy President, Senator Greenwich. Senator Walker.
Thank you, Mr. President. I want to thank all the honorable members for their brief but important contributions. By way of information, as it relates to Roundup, I believe it was in March, in May last year, that the government, the Ministry of Agriculture, made a decision and a proposal to introduce stringent controls on Roundup, which is a glyphosate, and it was agreed that there would be strict controls in terms of the ability to purchase it in Barbados. Senator Drix is correct. We, what's the word, in the Rotterdam Convention, we ratified it in September last year, I think it was. If I'm not don't want to be speaking out of turn. I'll check. And that certainly will help. It is recognized that there's a need to modernize the legislation, and they're working with the FAO currently to devise a new spate of legislation in that regard. And as they recognize that there's need for modernization of the pesticide laws and indeed the whole area of regulation. So this is being looked at. As it relates to water, that is being tested, not necessarily by agriculture, but EPD and also Water Authority and Health. They do testing of the water frequently and do send samples away for trace elements and to look for certain pesticides in our water. So that is being done. I suspect that when they do the whole reassessment of the legislation, they will perhaps look then at a need to modernize the composition of the Pesticide Control Board and to put persons from these various departments in place. But the work is being done, and as I said, it's ongoing. Okay? Mr. President, in these few words, I would just like to move that this bill be now read a second time.
The question is that this bill be now read a second time. Those honorable senators in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those against, please say no. Please say ayes have it.
Mr. President, I beg to move that Your Honor do now leave the chair and the Senate resolve itself into committee for further consideration of this bill.
The question is that I do now leave the chair and the Honorable Senate resolve itself into committee for further consideration of this bill. Those honorable senators in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. We think the ayes have it.
The Senate is now in committee.
Clause 1 as amended.
Mr. Chairman, I beg to move that Clause 1 as amended stand part.
The question is that Clause 1 as amended stand part.
It's just a change of date from 2020 to 2020.
Question is that Clause 1 as amended stand part. Honorable senators in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Clause 2.
Mr. Chairman, I beg to move that Clause 2 stand part.
The question is that Clause 2 stand part. Honorable senators in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Clause 3.
Mr. Chairman, I beg to move that Clause 3 stand part.
The question is that Clause 3 stand part. Honorable senators in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Clause 4.
Mr. Chairman, I beg to move that Clause 4 stand part.
The question is that Clause 4 stand part. Honorable senators in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Report.
Mr. Chairman, I beg to move that you do not report to His Honor the President the passing of one bill in committee.
The question is that I do now report to His Honor the President the passing of one bill in committee. Honorable senators in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
The chairman has just reported to me the passing of one bill in committee.
Mr. President, I beg to move that this bill be now read a third time.
The question is that this bill be now read a third time. Those honorable senators in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those against, please say no. We think the ayes have it.
Mr. President, I beg to move that this bill do now pass and be cited as the Pesticides Control Amendment Act 2021.
The question is that this bill do now pass and be cited as the Pesticides Control Amendment Act 2021. Those honorable senators in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say nay. We think the ayes have it. This bill is therefore passed and so cited. No, go ahead.
Mr. President, order number 2.
Order number 2.
In the name of the Honorable Leader of the Senate, to move the passing of a resolution to approve the publication in the Official Gazette of a notification under Section 9(1) of the Land Acquisition Act, Cap 228, declaring the abandonment of a compulsory acquisition of the parcel of land situate at Harry Smith in the parish of St. Philip in this island, more particularly described in the schedule to this resolution.
Senator McConney.
Mr. President, the resolution before this honorable House seeks to approval for the abandonment of the compulsory acquisition of land containing approximately 10.9041 hectares, around 26 acres, of land at Harry Smith in the parish of St. Philip. It's the property of the Marriott Barbados Limited. This abandonment is sought, Mr. President, pursuant to Section 9 of the Land Acquisition Act of the laws of Barbados, of course. Mr. President, you may recall that approval of this resolution to acquire this 10.9 hectares of land at Harry Smith for the public purposes of housing and tourism development, that this land was made up of 2 parcels. Part A, containing 8.4108 hectares, and Parcel B, which contained 2.4933 hectares. And it was stated then to be the property of the Marriott Barbados Limited. The Parliament would have approved the compulsory acquisition, and that approval was completed on February 5th of 2020 following debate in this honorable House. And on February 11th, 2020, Her Excellency would have given her gracious assent to the resolution, and that resolution was subsequently published in the Official Gazette of February the 13th, 2020. You may recall too, Mr. President, that this acquisition occurred mere weeks before the major impact of the COVID-19 coronavirus pandemic, which reached the shores of Barbados. This eventually led to a national curfew in March, and as a result, many businesses were closed, and the country and our people had to endure some very significant economic challenges. Mr. President, I said that because as a consequence of a number of the circumstances which has gripped Barbados as a result of this pandemic, Barbados has had to reprioritize our expenditure in the face of reduced revenues. In addition, sir, certain circumstances have also intervened at this critical time where there is a difference in opinion amongst parties as to what the value of that same piece of land is. At the time, that land was suggested to be valued at around 10 million, but there's some subsequent submission of approximately 24 million. In light of the circumstances around the pandemic, the need for us to reprioritize our expenditure, and of course understanding that this difference could be protracted in terms of seeking to resolve it, sir, this government has determined that we should at this time abandon this acquisition. While, Mr. President, we believe that this parcel of land remains attractive for the purposes for which government would have acquired it, we must, as I said, we must indeed consider our expenditure and redirect some of our resources. Section 9, Mr. President, of the Land Acquisition Act, it states that at any time before, in fact, let me read it with your permission verbatim. It says at any time before any compensation awarded under this act for the compulsory acquisition of any land has been paid, the minister may, by notification published in the Official Gazette, declare that the acquisition of such land is abandoned, provided that where the acquisition of the land has been approved by Parliament, the minister shall not cause such notification to be published except with the approval of both houses. That said, you would have to come back to both houses in order to get such approval. And so, sir, it is against that background of information that we come to this honorable house seeking approval of this abandonment. And in accordance with such, I beg to move that this resolution do now pass.
The question, Senator Franklin. Oh, sorry. The question is that this resolution do not pass. Those honorable senators in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say nay. I think the ayes have it. This resolution is therefore passed. Senator Walker.
Mr. President, I beg to move that this sitting be suspended for 20 minutes.
The question is that this sitting be now suspended for 20 minutes. I guess we've earned a bit of a comfort break. Those honorable senators in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say nay. Methinks the ayes have it. This sitting is therefore suspended for 20 minutes until 25 minutes to 7 o'clock.